I knew something was wrong the moment the door wouldn't open. Not stuck, not jammed, but held, as if someone had pressed a firm palm against it from the other side. I'm 74. My hearing isn't perfect anymore, but even I could tell the difference between an old hinge complaining and wood meeting something solid. I pushed harder, slow and steady. The door didn't move at all. For a second, I thought it was my own body betraying me. These joints of mine have a way of locking up at the most inconvenient moments. But then I leaned in, pressing my shoulder against the panel, and felt the faint vibration of metal. Not a hinge, a nail, more than one. I didn't panic. That's something old age teaches you. Fear wastes breath, and breath is a precious thing at my age. Instead, I stepped back, letting the silence settle. The house sounded wrong. Houses have their own breathing, the little hums of appliances, the settling of beams, the sigh of warm air rising. But the air in my bedroom felt still, too still, as if it were listening. Then the smell reached me. Not the clean kind of smoke that drifts in from someone's fireplace, but the heavy, sour bite of something starting to burn where it shouldn't. I went to the window. The frame was old, painted too many times, but the lock still worked. I lifted it, feeling the sticky resistance. Before opening it fully, I glanced back at the door. The smoke was creeping in under the gap at the bottom. A thin gray line. It moved with purpose. Smoke always tells the truth. I took the wooden chair from my vanity table. It wasn't much. My husband bought it 40 years ago, thinking I'd appreciate something elegant. It has a carved back and thin legs never meant for violence. Still, I held it with both hands, lifted it to shoulder height, and swung at the window. The first hit cracked the glass. The second made a hole. The third broke through completely, sending shards crashing onto the lawn outside. A few pieces cut my forearm, but the sting felt distant, as if it belonged to another body. Cold air rushed in, and with it the real sound of the fire. The low, hungry hum of wood beginning to surrender. I leaned out. The drop wasn't far, but at my age, even a small fall can steal months of mobility. So I sat on the windowsill first, sliding one leg over, then the other, lowering myself until my feet touched the narrow strip of dirt below. My knees trembled but held. When I straightened up, brushing glass from my sleeves, I looked toward the lawn, and there she was, my daughter. Diana stood near the hedge with her phone raised, the little red recording light blinking like a heartbeat. Her free hand lifted halfway, as if she intended to run toward me. But she didn't move. She only looked at me, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, breath steady. Too steady. She didn't say Mom, she didn't say anything. Behind me, the bedroom window glowed orange. Smoke puffed out around me like an accusation. Somewhere down the street a siren began to wail, growing louder. But the world around us, the lawn, the hedge, my daughter's face, stayed strangely calm. Diana lowered the phone a fraction, just enough for me to see the expression she was trying to hide. Not shock. Not relief. Annoyance. As if I had ruined something she'd planned carefully. I stepped forward, feeling the damp earth sink a little under my shoes. The sirens grew louder. Diana looked away, then back at me, then down at her phone. Her hand shook once, very slightly. She steadied it. I didn't ask her a thing. At 74, with the smell of smoke still clinging to my hair, a mother knows when the truth will not be spoken out loud. Instead, I just stood there, breathing deep, letting the cold night air fill my lungs. It tasted cleaner than anything inside that house, and I understood, without anyone telling me, that nothing about tonight had gone wrong. Everything had gone exactly as someone intended, and I wasn't supposed to be standing here at all. I didn't call out to her. At my age, you learn the power of silence. It settles in places where words only rattle uselessly. The fire behind me crackled louder, finding something new to chew on in the hallway. The smoke rising from the broken window trailed upward like a thin gray ribbon, drifting into the night. Diana finally lowered the phone all the way, but she didn't step forward. She just stared at me, her brows knitted as if she couldn't decide whether to pretend to be relieved or angry. The phone screen glowed against her face, cold and blue. She turned it off slowly, pressing her thumb to the screen longer than necessary. "You're out," she said at last, her voice small, not shaken, just surprised. Annoyed, even. I didn't think... She stopped herself. Not the right sentence, apparently. I took another step toward her, careful on the uneven lawn. My legs felt stiff from the climb through the window. My palms still stung where glass had cut into them, but my breath was steady, and that steadiness frightened her more than any scream could have. I saw it in the way she shifted her weight back, as if something in me had grown taller in the last few minutes. "Mom," she tried again, this time with a tremble she probably practiced for the camera. "Thank God you're safe. I was going to run in, but the door was nailed shut." I finished for her, calmly, as if I were discussing the weather. "Odd thing to do in your own house." Her lips parted. No words came out. For a moment, she looked like a child caught with stolen candy, trying to decide whether to lie or to cry. Before she could choose, the first fire truck turned the corner. The red lights bounced across the yard and spilled over the two of us like a warning. Diana stiffened. I saw her straighten her shoulders, pull her hair behind one ear, and put on a face like she had practiced in the mirror. She wasn't preparing to help me. She was preparing her story. The truck stopped in front of the burning house. Firefighters jumped out, shouting instructions to each other. One of them ran toward us. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" he asked, looking at me directly. "I'm not," I replied. I was inside. Window was the only way out. He blinked, taken aback. "The window?" "The door wouldn't open," I said. "It was nailed." The firefighter turned sharply toward Diana. People who live through smoke have a certain steadiness in their voices. People who lie shake without realizing it. Diana's hands were trembling again. She stepped forward, forcing a small, breathy sob. "Mom must have been confused," she said quickly. "She's been tired lately. I think she panicked. It must have just stuck." "Stuck doors don't have fresh nails in them," I said quietly. The firefighter glanced between us but didn't push further. They had flames to fight. Another man in heavy gear approached, guiding Diana away so they could work. She let him pull her aside, still glancing at me over her shoulder, as if measuring how much I would say. A hose roared to life. Water hit the house in a hard, white arc. Smoke burst from the roof. I watched calmly, the way one watches rain when they already know everything that matters has gotten wet. After a few minutes, a uniformed fire captain came over. His mustache was damp with sweat and mist. He asked the usual questions. Was I alone inside? Did I hear anything strange? Did I smell smoke before the fire alarm went off? "There was no alarm," I said. "And I told you. The door was nailed." He looked up at the house, then back at me, then at Diana, who was standing off to the side, arms crossed tight against her chest, pretending to shiver from the cold, although the night was warm. "We'll need to take a look at that door when the flames are out," he said. "Yes," I replied. "You should." The captain paused, studying my face. I think he expected panic or confusion, but found neither. Instead, he found a woman who had already done her panicking decades ago when her husband died, and she learned that fear does nothing but tire the lungs. He lowered his voice. "Are you safe to stand here? Do you need medical attention?" "No," I said softly. "I'm all right." Behind him, the glow through my bedroom window began to dim as the water took hold. The house was wounded, but not lost. A pity. Diana probably hoped for ashes. "I want to see the door once it's safe," I said. The captain nodded and walked back toward his team. Diana approached me tentatively, as if the air around me were dangerous. She pulled a blanket from a medic's hands and draped it over my shoulders, for the benefit of the onlookers. "Mom, listen," she whispered sharply, her teeth clenched around the softness she pretended to offer. "Don't say things like that. You're confused. Smoke can—" "Diana," I said, looking straight at her. "I wasn't supposed to survive tonight, was I?" Her face changed, not dramatically. She wasn't foolish enough for that. But just a flicker, a tightening around the eyes. "No," she said too quickly, shaking her head. "Of course not. How can you even—" But her voice cracked on the last word. A crack, just like the window. Just like her plan. And suddenly, I knew with absolute clarity that what I had escaped wasn't just a fire. It was my own child's belief that I no longer mattered. And that knowledge, more than the flames, chilled me to the bone. The fire was mostly out by the time they let me move closer. The air still smelled sharp and dirty, the kind of smoke that clings to the back of your throat and stays there even after you drink water. I wrapped the blanket tighter around me, less for warmth than for something to do with my hands. They were still trembling, not from fear, but from the strain of holding myself steady. A young paramedic came over with a flashlight and asked to check my oxygen levels. I let him. I've learned over the years that fighting kindness only makes it awkward. His hands were gentle, his voice calm. When he finished, he nodded approvingly. "You're lucky," he said. "Most people trapped inside a burning house don't get out fast enough." I didn't answer. I wasn't interested in talking about luck. Behind him, a cluster of firefighters carried out what was left of my bedroom door. It looked obscene in the open air. A private thing ripped from where it belonged. I stepped toward it, slowly, until the fire captain noticed and walked over. "Ma'am, don't get too close. There are exposed nails." "I'd like to see them," I said. He hesitated only a second before nodding. "All right." "Just watch your step." The door lay on the grass like a wounded animal. The wood was blackened around the edges, but the center was intact enough to show the truth. 3 nails driven in from the outside at an angle no carpenter would use. Fresh silver metal, bright under the floodlights, too new to have ever belonged to this old house. The captain crouched beside it and traced a gloved finger along one of the nails. "This wasn't accidental," he said. "Someone sealed it recently, within hours, not days." Diana heard him. She turned her back to us, pretending to talk to one of the insurance men who had arrived far too early for this to be coincidence. Her voice was sharp, low, strained. The captain rose and faced me. "Ma'am, you said you were alone inside?" "I was," I answered. "And no one else had access to the house tonight?" I looked at him, at his calm eyes, at the soot on his helmet, at the streak of sweat drying on the side of his face. This man had seen worse than my truth. "My daughter was here," I said. "She told me to rest. Said she'd take care of some things in the hallway. Then she stepped out. And not long after, I smelled smoke." He took that in with a slow breath. Not surprised, not shocked, just thoughtful. "Would you be willing to speak with the fire investigator?" he asked. "Yes." "Now?" "Yes." There was no need to think. Some doors you open before you give yourself time to hesitate. A tall man in a dark jacket approached. He introduced himself, but his name slipped past me. Not because I didn't hear it, but because names don't matter when someone's job is to listen to the worst parts of your life. He pulled out a small notebook and a pen. "Mrs. Hale, tell me everything exactly as it happened." So I did. Not dramatically, not with trembling voice or wide eyes, just steadily, the way one reads instructions for something fragile. I told him about the door, the nails, the smoke, the window, the chair, the fall, and finally, about seeing Diana on the lawn, filming. When I mentioned the phone, the investigator's pen paused. "Filming?" he asked. "Yes." "Was she calling for help?" "No. She was pointed at the house." "Was she calling your name?" "No." He didn't look up from the notebook, but I felt the shift in the air. A small, almost imperceptible tightening, like a knot forming in a rope. "And did she assist you once you were outside?" he asked. "No." "No attempt to approach you? Support you? Check your injuries?" "No." Only then did he lift his eyes. They were steady, unreadable. "Is there any reason your daughter would benefit from an accident occurring tonight?" I took a breath. At 74, breaths come slower, fuller. I let mine settle before answering. "She has talked about the house," I said. "A lot. About insurance, about needing space, about needing money, about how I shouldn't be living alone at my age." "Any financial conflicts?" "Not conflicts," I said quietly, "but expectations." He wrote that down too. Behind us, Diana was pacing near the hedge, arms folded tight, jaw clenched. Her phone, now lowered, hung uselessly from her fingers. She kept glancing toward us, her expression shifting from impatience to worry to anger. She looked like someone watching a dam develop cracks. The investigator closed his notebook. "Thank you, Mrs. Hale. That was very helpful." Before I could respond, a car pulled up fast, too fast, and braked sharply. A man in a suit stepped out, his tie crooked, hair messy as if he'd dressed in a hurry. He strode straight toward Diana. I recognized him, her boyfriend, the one who never looked me in the eye. He whispered something harsh at her. She flinched. They argued in quick, sharp bursts, too low for me to hear. But the way they kept glancing at me, that said enough. Another firefighter approached the captain, murmured something. The captain nodded, then pointed toward the burned doorway. The structure was stable enough now for closer inspection. They would find more nails, more evidence, more answers Diana did not want found. The investigator looked at me again. "We'll need you at the station tomorrow. Just to formalize your statement." "I'll be there," I said. He gave a respectful nod and walked away. Diana watched him go, her face tightening with each step he took. Then she looked at me, not with fear, not with guilt, but with something far colder. Blame. As if I had ruined her evening, her plan, her life. And standing there, blanket around my shoulders, smoke still clinging to my clothes, I understood something simple and hard. My own daughter saw me not as a mother, but as a problem she had tried, and failed, to solve. The investigators didn't leave right away. They stayed long after the last flames hissed into silence, combing through the hallway with flashlights, bending down to study scorch marks, touching the wood as if they were reading it like Braille. Fire leaves patterns. It speaks. And the men who've spent their lives listening to it know when it's lying and when someone else is. I stood a little distance away, watching them move through my home like careful surgeons. The blanket around my shoulders had grown damp from the night air. My hair smelled like smoke and old paint, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. Fear has a way of waking up parts of you didn't know had gone to sleep. One of the investigators stepped out of the front door, holding a small metal object with a gloved hand. Even from where I stood, it gleamed under the floodlights. A nail, not charred, not old, clean, straight. Recently hammered. He looked at the fire captain, who nodded grimly. Diana's boyfriend, Mark, was pacing near the driveway. He rubbed his temples, muttering something to her. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I knew the tone. It was the sound of someone realizing all the traps they set were suddenly pointing in the wrong direction. "What do you mean they're saying that?" he snapped at her, a little too loud this time. Diana shot him a sharp look and hushed him, but her composure was slipping like a cheap mask in humidity. She kept glancing at the investigators, at me, at the house, then back at the investigators, as if eyes could erase evidence. The fire captain finally approached us, wiping soot from his hands. "Mrs. Hale," he said, "we've confirmed what you described. The door was secured from the outside using 3 nails, fresh ones. No sign of warping or accidental sealing." Diana stepped forward quickly, as if pulled by a string. "Captain, my mother has memory issues," she began, her voice sugary but shaking slightly. "She must be confused. She hasn't been herself lately. You know how age—" I looked at her, steady, silent. I didn't need to interrupt her. She interrupted herself just fine. The captain raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, the door was nailed. Anyone would have had trouble getting out." Diana opened her mouth, then closed it. Her eyes flicked toward Mark. He gave the smallest shake of his head. "Stop talking." The captain went on. "We'll need to secure the house until the investigation is complete. No one enters or removes anything without clearance." Diana's face tightened. "But this is our home." "My home," I said quietly. She turned to me sharply. "Mom, please. This isn't the time." Oh, but it was exactly the time. The captain handed me a card. "We'll contact you tomorrow morning. Don't stay here. You'll need a safe place for the night." Safe. Funny word, considering where I'd been an hour ago. "I'll manage," I said. I always have. A pair of men in jackets marked Insurance Claims Division stepped forward next. Their timing was impeccable. Too impeccable. One of them already had a clipboard out, ready to sweep the scene for details. Diana's attention snapped to them instantly. "Finally," she said, urgency leaking into her voice. "Listen, I need to file a claim immediately. This whole tragedy—" "Ma'am," one of the agents interrupted, "we'll need to review the initial findings first." "What do you mean?" she demanded. The agent gestured to the investigators near the broken door. "We can't process anything until the fire department completes its report. There seems to be discrepancy regarding—" His voice lowered, but I knew the word he didn't finish. "Cause." Diana's expression hardened. "There is no discrepancy. It was an electrical fault. The house is old. Ask anyone." But the agent wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me. "Mrs. Hale," he asked, "do you know of any faulty wiring? Any previous incidents? Any repairs?" Anything that might have contributed? I shook my head. No. Everything was updated last year. New breakers. New wiring. I keep all the receipts. The agent blinked. You keep receipts? Of course. At my age, people assume you misplace your own thoughts. They don't expect order. They certainly don't expect documentation. I'll bring them tomorrow, I added. Diana's mouth fell slightly open, like someone had slapped her with a feather, light but humiliating. The agent nodded respectfully. That would be very helpful. Diana tried to speak, but her voice caught. She looked at Mark again. He took her elbow and pulled her aside, whispering sharply. I watched them from the corner of my eye. I didn't want to hear their words. I wanted to hear their fear. They had expected to direct the narrative. Now they were chasing it. One of the younger firefighters stepped toward me with a gentle expression. Ma'am, we need a contact number for updates. Do you have someone who can pick you up tonight? A relative? A close friend? No, I said simply. He looked sympathetic, as if loneliness were the worst thing I'd survived tonight. But I felt no sadness at the thought. Some truths you stop apologizing for after 70 years. I'll call a cab, I said. Diana spun around. Mom, you don't need a cab. You can stay at my place. It's late and you... No, I said. I'm fine, but... No. She took a step toward me, trying to soften her voice. Mom, please, you're shaking. I got out of a burning house, I said. I'm entitled to shake. Her face froze at that. The firefighters pretended not to hear. The insurance men kept their eyes on their clipboards, but their pens paused. Mark muttered something under his breath. Diana elbowed him. The fire captain approached again. Mrs. Hale, once you've found a place to stay, get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. Tomorrow? Tomorrow meant statements, reports, questions, answers, evidence, truths that had been waiting years to come into daylight. I'll be ready, I said. When I turned toward the street, the night felt wider than I remembered, the air cleaner, the space around me larger, and behind me, my daughter watched like someone seeing a door close that she needed desperately to keep open. Only now she had no hammer, and I had no intention of letting her board up my life ever again. The motel room was small, with thin carpet and a rattling heater, but the silence inside it felt cleaner than anything I'd heard in years. No footsteps running toward me with demands. No voices calling my name only when they needed something. No tension, no pretense, no daughter rehearsing her next performance. I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress and let my hands rest on my knees. They were still scratched from the glass, but the bleeding had stopped. The skin around the cuts looked swollen and angry, yet I felt strangely calm. My body reacts louder than I do these days. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't take off my shoes. I just sat there, listening to the hum of the heater and the occasional car passing outside. Anyone looking at me might have thought I was in shock. But shock feels like emptiness, and what I felt was the opposite. Everything inside me felt painfully, sharply awake. I replayed the night slowly, piece by piece, but not the fire, not the heat or the smoke or even the nails. What I kept hearing, over and over, was the stillness on Diana's face when she watched me crawl out of that window. The look of someone watching a mistake ruin a plan. I thought of all the times she told me, "Mom, you need to trust me," and how often trust was the one thing she didn't deserve. I pulled my small travel bag onto the bed. I'd grabbed it quickly on my way out of the house earlier that evening, before Diana told me to rest for a while. Funny how simple decisions turn out to matter. Inside the bag were only essentials: pajamas, toothbrush, a small bottle of lotion, and my wallet. I unzipped the wallet and looked at the worn photograph tucked inside. My husband, John. He was standing in front of our old repair shop, one hand on his hip, the other shielding his eyes from the sun. He always squinted a little too much in pictures, as if he couldn't quite believe the world was bright enough to require it. "You'd know exactly what to do," I whispered. The heater rattled louder for a moment, as if answering. I placed the photo on the nightstand and lay back against the pillows. They were flat, like someone had ironed them on purpose, but I didn't mind. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the faint water stains that curled like old tree branches. My body felt heavy, but there was no urge to sleep. Instead, there was a slow, growing anger, not hot and wild, but something older and quieter. Something that had been pushed down so many years, it had learned to live in the cracks of my ribs. It spread through me with a clarity that almost steadied my heartbeat. Not anger at the fire, not even at the attempted betrayal. Anger at myself, at all the excuses I'd made for Diana, at the little hurts I'd brushed aside, at the times I told myself she was just stressed, or just overwhelmed, or just going through a difficult phase. How long is a phase allowed to last before the truth stops being polite? I remembered how she used to come over only after she heard I'd sold the repair shop. How she suddenly insisted on managing my bills, my mail, my appointments. How she kept telling me to leave things to her, but kept the explanations vague. All those times, I chose to stay quiet because I didn't want to lose her completely. But the thing no one tells you about silence is that it doesn't protect you. It only teaches others how much they can get away with. A knock at the motel door startled me. My heart jumped harder than it should have. I sat up slowly. "Mrs. Hale?" a voice called. I opened the door a crack. The fire investigator stood there, holding a small paper bag and a thermos. "I figured you might not have eaten," he said. "The diner down the road was still open." I stared at him. "That's very kind." He shrugged. "You've had a long night. Thought you shouldn't face it on an empty stomach." He handed me the bag and thermos. The smell of warm soup drifted out. "Try to get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow we'll sort through everything." Sort through everything. If only he knew that everything stretched far beyond tonight's flames. When he left, I set the soup on the table but didn't eat it yet. Instead, I walked to the small motel bathroom and turned on the light. The mirror was cracked in the corner, distorting the reflection a little. I leaned in closer, studying the woman looking back at me. Her hair smelled of smoke. Her cheeks were pale. Her eyes were not frightened. They were tired, hurt, betrayed, but they weren't afraid. "Is this what it took?" I whispered. "For me to finally see my own child clearly?" The faucet dripped steadily. Each drop marked the small, quiet distance between who I had been and who I would have to become if I wanted to protect myself. I went back to the bed and finally took a sip of the soup. It was too salty, but warm. It reminded me I was still here, still breathing. I lay down and closed my eyes. Not to sleep. Sleep would not come, but to gather strength. Because tomorrow wasn't just another day. Tomorrow was the day I stopped pretending that a mother's love was enough to make a daughter honorable, and the day I stopped confusing duty with sacrifice. And for the first time in years, as the soup warmed my chest and the night settled around me, I felt a thin, fragile thread of something I thought I had lost. Resolve. Morning came too early, with a thin strip of gray light slipping past the curtains and settling on the carpet like dust. I hadn't slept. I must have closed my eyes a few times, but every sound, the heater switching off, a truck passing outside, someone walking past the room, pulled me straight back to awareness. Still, when I sat up, my mind felt strangely clear, as if the ashes of yesterday had settled into something solid. I took a slow breath and reached for my purse. The business card the fire captain gave me lay inside, next to my reading glasses and a single peppermint candy I'd been saving for months. Beneath that was my old metal keyring. Not just keys, tiny reminders of a life I'd tried to keep orderly. The shop key from decades ago, my house key, the tiny safe deposit box key with its sharp edges. That was the one I needed today. The motel coffee tasted like burnt cardboard, but it was hot. And at my age, hot matters more than flavor. I wrapped the blanket around my shoulders again and sat for a moment before standing. I braced myself on the nightstand, not from weakness, but from a lifetime of moving carefully. Then I picked up my purse and walked out. The morning air felt colder than it should have. Maybe that was just my body trying to adjust. The cab driver didn't talk much. Fine by me. He dropped me off in front of the bank, a building with polished glass doors and a tidy row of shrubs out front. Too neat to match the weight of what I carried inside. Inside, the receptionist recognized me. "Good morning, Mrs. Hale. Do you need access to your box today?" "Yes," I said. "I do?" She nodded politely, not knowing how profound that simple errand had become. The vault room was always cold. I sat at one of the small metal tables and placed the safe deposit box in front of me. When I opened it, the faint smell of paper and old metal rose. A quiet smell, like secrets that had waited too long. Inside were envelopes, folders, old receipts, the kinds of things most people throw away. But I wasn't most people. I had kept everything John and I ever signed together. The deed to the house, the sale papers for our repair shop, insurance forms, bank statements. Letters from the bank showing every transfer I ever made, none of which Diana had bothered to ask about. She thought I forgot things. She thought age meant confusion. She never understood that I forget people far sooner than I forget paperwork. I opened the folder with the shop sale documents. John and I worked in that place for 40 years. My name was on every contract. When I sold it after his death, I kept a full copy, legally notarized, properly sealed. Diana had always assumed the money from that sale was already gone. She never asked how much remained. She never asked where it was. She only hinted here and there that an accident could simplify things. And now she understood that accidents leave traces. I pulled out another envelope, one she didn't know existed. My updated homeowner's insurance policy, signed last spring. I remembered the agent's words. "You're fully covered, Mrs. Hale. Just keep these documents safe." Safe. He would be proud of how literally I had taken that advice. A quiet knock on the vault doorframe made me look up. It was Mr. Jennings, the branch manager. He'd known me since I was a young wife bringing in rolled coins to deposit for the shop's first loan. "Mrs. Hale," he said gently, "the fire department investigator called. He said you might come today. He asked me to make sure you had access to anything you needed." "Thank you," I said. He hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry about your daughter." I closed the folder slowly. "Everyone is," I said. "Except her." He didn't ask more. He simply walked away, giving me the dignity of silence. I gathered the documents into neat stacks. My hands shook a little, not from fear, but from the weight of what I was doing, what I knew I had to do next. Diana had spent years assuming I was weak. That age had worn me down. That grief had made me soft. But age is not softness. It is study. It is memory. It is the long, slow gathering of truths others hope you've forgotten. When I closed the box and stood, my knees protested, but my resolve didn't. I walked out of the bank with the documents secure in my purse, feeling their weight like armor. There was one more stop I needed to make today. The lawyer who still addressed me as Mrs. Hale, not Mom, not dear, not sweetheart. A man who dealt with facts, not guilt. And for the first time in a very long time, I was ready to deal in facts too. Andrew Malone's office was in a 2-story brick building near the courthouse, the kind of place where the floors creaked just enough to remind you they'd been walked on by decades of people with problems. I'd known Andrew since he was a young associate with too much hair and not enough patience. Now he was in his 60s, grayer, slower, but far sharper than anyone gave him credit for. Life does that to the observant ones. I took the elevator. My knees weren't in the mood for stairs. And when the doors opened, his secretary looked up and gave me a sympathetic smile. "Mrs. Hale, he's expecting you." Of course he was. I had left a message at dawn. My voice must have carried something unusual in it, because he told her to clear the morning schedule. His office door was open. He stood when I entered, smoothing down the front of his worn suit jacket. "Margaret," he said, and there was no pity in his tone, just respect. "Sit. Tell me everything." It's strange how hard it is to begin telling the truth after years of telling yourself something gentler. I folded my hands in my lap, feeling the sting of the cuts. He noticed them immediately. "That from the fire?" he asked. "Yes." He nodded slowly, as if storing that detail somewhere important. When I finally began describing the night, the nails, the smoke, the window, the phone in Diana's hand, he didn't interrupt. His eyes didn't widen, his jaw didn't clench. He just listened, his pen moving quietly across a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he set the pen down. "Margaret," he said, "your daughter tried to kill you." The sentence didn't hit me like a blow. I'd lived through the blow already. This was simply the name for it. "Yes," I said. He breathed out once, sharply. "The fire department's initial report will confirm forced confinement. The insurance investigation is already raising flags. This isn't speculation. This is a criminal act." He said it plainly, not dramatically, and somehow that helped. Truth doesn't always need volume. Sometimes it only needs air. I reached into my purse and placed the documents from the bank on his desk. He adjusted his glasses and spread them out. "You kept everything," he murmured, almost admiringly. "I always do." He studied the deed, the sale contracts, the insurance policies. He pushed aside the old bank statements, then pulled them back, reread dates, cross-checked figures in his mind. "This," he said finally, tapping the insurance policy with his finger, "is especially important. If Diana was trying to stage an accident for financial gain, this proves she didn't understand your actual coverage. That strengthens your case." "My case?" I repeated. His gaze softened. "Yes, Margaret, you have a case now, and we're not going to let her twist this into anything else." I sat a little straighter. The heater in his office hummed softly. Outside, a bird tapped once on the window. Everything felt strangely steady. "What do I need to do?" I asked. He slid a fresh sheet of paper toward me. "2 things. First, A formal statement. I'll help you structure it. Second, we update your legal protections. Power of attorney, will, trust arrangements if you choose. I didn't hesitate. Yes, all of it. For your own security, he added gently, you should consider limiting Diana's access to you. No unsupervised visits. No handling your mail or accounts. No keys. She hasn't had a key in years, I said. She took it away from herself. He gave a small, dry smile. Good. He began drafting the revised documents, handwriting sharp and deliberate. I watched his pen move across the page, each stroke tightening the boundaries around the life I had let Diana walk through for too long. At one point he asked, "Are you sure you're ready for this?" "I'm 74, I replied. "If not now, when?" He nodded once, firmly. "Then we proceed." We spent the next hour outlining the next steps. Appointments, statements, protections. Not one part of it frightened me. A strange thing happens when the worst moment of your life has already passed. You stop fearing paperwork. When everything was signed for the day, Andrew leaned back in his chair. "Margaret," he said quietly, "I've known you a long time. You've always tried to keep peace in your family. But this wasn't a family problem. This was survival. I'm glad you came." "So am I," said. As I walked out into the late morning sun, the cold air touched my face like a reminder. I held my purse close, feeling the papers inside. For the first time in years, my steps felt heavier but steadier, like each one had purpose. I didn't know what Diana was doing right now, panicking, planning, rewriting her story, but it no longer mattered. For the first time, I wasn't walking into her version of events. I was walking into my own. I didn't go back to the motel after leaving Andrew's office. I couldn't make myself walk into that small room again, not with my head filled the way it was. Instead, I found a bench across from the courthouse, under a bare tree whose branches scratched lightly against the wind. I sat there for a long time, watching people pass, hurrying, talking, carrying folders, talking on phones, everyone wrapped in their own worries. I was thinking of Diana, yes, but not with the old ache. There was no room left for the soft excuses I'd been feeding myself for years. What took their place wasn't anger, it was clarity, a thin, cold kind, the kind that doesn't tremble. My phone buzzed. For a moment, I almost didn't look. I assumed it was Diana or Mark or one of the numbers I didn't recognize that had been trying to reach me since the morning. But when I finally glanced at the screen, my chest loosened a little. Emily, my granddaughter. Her message was simple. "Grandma, can I come see you?" I typed back, "Yes. Tell me where you are." She arrived 20 minutes later, walking quickly, her long, dark coat flapping in the wind. Her hair, usually pinned tidy, had come loose in strands. She looked worried, but not afraid. When she spotted me on the bench, she broke into a half run. "Grandma," she breathed, sitting beside me without asking. "Are you okay? I came as soon as—" She paused, catching her breath. "I've heard things. Dad's talking to Mom. People are saying, you were trapped." Her voice wavered, but she kept her eyes on mine, searching for truth. "You heard correctly," I said. She shut her eyes tight for a moment, as if bracing herself. Then she opened them again. "I knew something was wrong," she whispered. "Mom's been acting strange for weeks. And yesterday—" She swallowed hard. "Yesterday, she told me you were tired, that I shouldn't bother you." But the way she said it, I didn't believe her. I watched her fingers twist together, a nervous habit she'd had since she was little. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly. I should have checked on you. I should have. You couldn't have stopped it, I said. And you're here now. She nodded, wiping her cheek quickly with the back of her hand, pretending it was just the wind. Grandma, she said quietly, they're lying. They're trying to make it sound like it was an accident. But I saw messages. On Mom's phone. My breath caught, not sharply, but with a kind of resigned confirmation. She hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket. She leaves her phone around sometimes, she said. She thinks I don't notice anything. Her voice tightened. But she talks about the house, about how she's waiting on paperwork, about how it would all be easier once things were settled. She handed me her phone. I didn't scroll. I didn't need to. The preview of the last message was enough. Mark, everything is ready. After tonight, we can finally breathe. I gave the phone back gently. Emily pulled her coat tighter around herself, as if the world had grown colder in the last few minutes. I didn't want to believe it, she whispered. But last night, after I heard about the fire, I knew. Her voice broke on the last word. I placed my hand over hers. Her fingers were cold, but they didn't pull away. What's going to happen now? She asked. An investigation, I said. Statements, paperwork, truth. She nodded, but her shoulders sank. Dad's not himself anymore, she said softly. He listens to her. He believes everything she says. I know. I don't want to lose you, she said suddenly. Not to them, not to any of this. You won't, I answered. She leaned gently against my shoulder, the way she used to when she was a little girl afraid of thunderstorms. I let her. Maybe I needed it as much as she did. After a long silence, she sat up and looked at me with a steadiness that felt far older than her 19 years. Whatever you need, she said. I'm with you. I believed her, because she wasn't saying it out of guilt or fear or calculation. She was saying it because she still knew what family was supposed to mean. And in that moment, on a cold bench across from the courthouse, I realized something simple and painful. I hadn't lost everything. Just the parts that were already gone long before the fire ever touched my door. By late afternoon, the cold had settled deep into my bones, the kind that doesn't leave even after you warm your hands. Emily insisted on driving me back to the motel. She stayed until she saw me unlock the door, then hugged me tightly before heading home. I watched her car pull away, the taillights fading into the gray of the evening. For a moment, I let myself breathe. Just one quiet breath. But peace never lasts long when someone else is panicking. It started with a rapid knock on the door, too harsh, too frantic to belong to a stranger. I didn't move at first. Then the knock came again, louder, and a voice followed. Mom, open the door. Diana. The voice of someone who didn't come to apologize, but to salvage whatever pieces of her plan she could still grab. I opened the door only halfway. She pushed lightly against it, as if she expected me to let her in by instinct alone. I've been calling you all day, she said, breath uneven. Why aren't you answering your phone? I've been busy, I said. Her eyes flicked over my face, trying to read me, trying to guess how much I knew. She stepped forward again, but I kept my hand on the door. Mom, please, she said, softening her tone. I just want to talk. The thing about softness is that it means nothing without sincerity. Hers slid off me like cheap perfume. Talk, then, I said. She hesitated, not used to me standing in my own doorway like a gatekeeper, not used to me blocking anything. Everyone's confused about what happened last night, she began quickly. The fire investigators, the insurance people, they're misunderstanding everything. I'm trying to clear things up, but it's complicated. It seems simple to me, I said. The door was nailed shut. Her face twitched, just a small betrayal, but enough. Mom, you're tired, she said. You were probably disoriented. No, I said. It was the quietest interruption I'd ever made in my life. But it stopped her cold. I could see her working through her next set of lines, the way a performer flips through a script in her head. She pressed her lips together. Then she tried a different angle. You're making this harder than it needs to be, she said. If you tell them you're not sure about the door, if you say you panicked, the insurance claim will go smoothly. We'll be able to rebuild. You'll get a new bedroom. Maybe a new wing? A new wing, as if life were measured by how many rooms one could add. You want me to lie, I said. I want you to help, she snapped. This affects all of us. All of us? I repeated. She winced, realizing she'd exposed more than she meant to. Her voice rose, brittle around the edges. Mom, listen. If you tell them the wrong story, they could deny the claim entirely. Do you understand what that means? We'll be drowning in debt. I have bills. Mark has... Plans? I asked. Investments? A future paid for by an insurance tragedy? Her cheeks flushed. I never said that. You didn't have to. She looked away then, blinking too fast, breathing too quickly. I could see her panic pressing against her ribs, trying to claw its way out. Not remorse. Fear of losing control. Finally, she said, You're going to ruin everything. I'm going to tell the truth. That's the same thing, she whispered. The hallway light flickered above her, buzzing faintly. It made her look smaller somehow, less like the daughter I had raised, and more like a stranger who had borrowed her face. She tried one last time. Mom, please, don't do this. Not to me. That was the moment I felt something inside me shift, something that had been stiff and dormant for years, a boundary, a spine, a knowledge that motherhood doesn't mean surrender. I'm not doing anything to you, I said. You did that yourself. Her breath caught. For a second, she looked 14 again, caught lying about breaking a window. But at 14, her shame had been real. This was something else. She stepped back with a sharp exhale. Fine. Do whatever you want. But don't expect me to fix anything for you after this. Don't expect help. I almost laughed, not out of humor, but out of the quiet realization that she truly believed she ever had helped. Good night, Diana, I said. I closed the door gently, not slamming it. Slamming is for people who need to be loud to feel strong. I stood there, hand on the knob, listening to her footsteps retreat down the walkway, quick and angry. When silence finally settled in again, it felt lighter, not peaceful. Peace wasn't ready for me yet, but honest, and that was more than enough. I woke early the next morning, not because I slept well, but because my body had had enough of lying still. The motel bed had left a stiff line down my back, and for a moment I wasn't sure if it was the mattress or the weight of everything waiting outside the door. But the air was clean, and the world was quiet, and that was enough to make me stand. I took a slow shower, letting the hot water soften the tightness in my shoulders. When I stepped outside, the cold morning hit my face with the same blunt honesty as yesterday's truth. I called a cab, and when it arrived, I asked to be taken to my house, not to go inside, but because the fire department had called. They wanted to walk me through their findings. I wasn't prepared to see the yellow tape. Somehow, I thought they'd remove it overnight. But there it was, stretched across my porch railing and front door, fluttering in the wind like a warning I didn't need. The house looked tired, wounded, but standing. Stubborn thing. It reminded me of myself. A small group waited by the sidewalk. The fire investigator, the captain, and a woman with neatly pinned hair and a clipboard. She introduced herself as a representative from the insurance company's fraud division. That explained her expression, calm, cautious, already calculating. "Mrs. Hale," she said, "thank you for coming. We want to review preliminary observations. It will help us understand what really happened." What really happened? Finally, someone asked the right question. The fire investigator led us inside. The hallway floor was covered in ash, damp in places, cracked in others. The walls were streaked with smoke, black and gray like bruises. I followed carefully, each step tapping gently against memories that hadn't had time to process. At the end of the hallway, the investigator stopped. He pointed to the charred frame of my bedroom door. "This is what concerns us most," he said. The nails were still visible, bent now, blackened, but unmistakable. The burned wood around them had receded, making them stand out like exposed bones. "These nails were driven in recently," he continued. "Clean entry points, no corrosion, and the angles suggest they were hammered in from the outside, not by someone inside the room." The insurance woman leaned closer, inspecting the metal. "How recently?" she asked. "Within an hour or two before the fire began." She straightened her back. "And there's no sign Mrs. Hale had tools in the room?" "No," he said. "And even if she had, the angle would be impossible from the inside." They all looked at me then, as if waiting for a reaction. But what reaction is left to give after you've already lived through the worst moment of your life? "Go on," I said. He led us into the living room. The windows were soot-stained. The curtains were gone entirely. Burned or taken for evidence, I wasn't sure. In the corner, the investigator stopped again. "Mrs. Hale, do you know who this belongs to?" He pointed at the floor. A tool, a hammer. Not mine, not John's. New, with a rubber grip and a bright blue handle. I shook my head. The insurance woman took a photo. "This will need to be examined for prints." The captain added softly, "A neighbor saw someone with a hammer last night." I didn't breathe for a moment. "Who?" I asked. He hesitated. "Mrs. Keating, she lives across the street?" I nodded. I knew her. We waved from time to time, shared tomatoes once in a while. "She says she saw your daughter and her partner carrying wood boards and a hammer into the house late yesterday afternoon." The words hung in the air. Heavy. Certain. The insurance woman adjusted her glasses, as if placing everything into new mental folders. "This is significant," she said carefully. "Given the circumstances." Circumstances. Such a small word for something so monstrous. The investigator guided us back outside. The morning sun was brighter now, bouncing off the river down the street. It felt almost disrespectful, how ordinary the day looked. "Mrs. Hale," he said, "I need your permission to take a full sworn statement today. It will support the arson report." I nodded. "We'll also recommend criminal proceedings," he added gently. "This wasn't an accident." He didn't need to say more. I already knew. As they walked away, discussing next steps, I stayed on the sidewalk a moment longer, looking at the house that had held decades of my life. The walls were blackened, the windows broken, the smell of smoke thick. But underneath all that ruin was something still standing, not untouched, not unharmed, but upright, just like me. Behind me, a car door slammed. I turned. It was Diana's, and from the way she stepped out, sharp movements, wild eyes, no coat despite the cold, I knew she'd heard everything. Her panic wasn't loud. It was in the way she froze when she saw me speaking calmly with the investigators. It was in the tightness of her jaw. And in that moment, we both understood something with total, painful clarity. Her story had already begun to crumble, and mine had only just begun to be told. The police station was quieter than I expected. No shouting, no slamming doors, just a low hum of printers and soft conversations, like a library where the books were made of people's mistakes. They led me to a small interview room with a metal table and 2 chairs. I sat slowly, placing my purse on my lap, feeling the faint sting of the cuts on my palms when I rested them together. A detective entered a moment later, middle-aged, with tired eyes, and a badge that looked older than his suit. He greeted me politely, not with pity, and that alone made it easier to breathe. "Mrs. Hale," he said, settling across from me, "I want you to know you're not a suspect. You're a victim, but I need a clear, detailed statement." "I'm ready," I said. And strangely, I was. He clicked on the recorder. The little red light blinked, steady as a heartbeat. Then he folded his hands and waited. I spoke the way someone speaks when they're sorting linens, slowly, carefully, making sure nothing is left tangled. I told him how Diana had insisted I rest, how she'd kept me in the bedroom longer than necessary, how the door refused to open, how the smoke slipped under the wood like a warning, how I broke the window, climbed out, and found my daughter filming. When I reached that part, the detective's pen stopped moving. "Filming?" he repeated quietly. "Yes," I said. "Not calling for help. Filming." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I kept going. The hammer, the nails, the neighbor's sighting. Diana's behavior afterward, more irritated than relieved. Her visit to the motel, asking me to correct my memory so the insurance claim wouldn't be denied. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't tremble. The words came out steady, like stones laid one after another on a path. When I finished, the room was silent. The detective leaned back slowly, exhaling through his nose. "Mrs. Hale," he began, then paused. "What you're describing, this isn't confusion or an accident. This is intentional, and it's serious." "I know," I said. "Did your daughter ever threaten you before? Ask for money? Pressure you about the house?" "Not directly, but she assumed things. Spoke as if I had already given her everything, as if my life was just the part before she inherited." He wrote that down carefully. "Do you feel afraid of her?" he asked. I thought about that. About the fire. About the moment I saw her phone aimed at my burning house. About the motel hallway where she tried to force me into one final lie. "No," I said. "Not anymore." He studied me for a moment. Perhaps he expected tears, or shaking hands, or a voice that cracked. But survival can make a person unnervingly calm. "Your statement is strong," he said. "And with the physical evidence, the insurance records, and your neighbor, we have enough to proceed." Proceed? Another small word for another irreversible step. He turned off the recorder, the little red light dying quietly. As he stood to walk me out, he said, "You've been through something terrible. Most people break down after a night like that." "I broke down years ago," I answered. "I just didn't notice it then." He didn't try to comfort me. He only nodded respectfully. Outside the station, the air felt sharper, almost metallic. I stood for a moment, adjusting the strap of my purse on my shoulder. My legs trembled from the long meeting, but the rest of me felt anchored. The truth was out now, spoken in full, recorded, signed. No one could twist it back into a shape that fit Diana's plans. And as I walked toward the waiting cab, I felt something unexpected settle inside me. Not relief, not triumph. Just a quiet, solid certainty. I had finally said everything I'd been silent about for years. The temporary rental house Andrew helped me arrange was small, a little drafty, and sparsely furnished. But it was mine for now. Mine to lock. Mine to breathe in. Mine to sit in without waiting for footsteps or demands. I boiled water for tea, opened the blinds, and sat by the window with the cup warming my hands. It was quiet enough that I heard her before she reached the porch. Quick, uneven footsteps, the kind of steps people make when panic drives them faster than their thoughts. A car door slammed, then another set of footsteps. Heavy. Marks. I didn't stand. I didn't brace myself. I just waited. The door rattled once. Then Diana's voice. "Mom, open the door." I didn't move. "Mom, I know you're in there. I see the lights." I walked to the door slowly and opened it just enough to look at her through the gap. Her hair was messy, her eyes bloodshot, mascara smudged from either crying or rubbing too hard. She looked older than she did 2 days ago. Panic ages faster than time. "Let me in," she said. "Please." "No." Her mouth fell open. She hadn't expected that. Mark stood behind her, shifting from foot to foot, like someone about to be caught doing something stupid. He didn't look at me directly. Diana pushed forward. "Mom, this is insane. You're blowing everything out of proportion. They're asking questions. They're talking about charges. You have to tell them you were confused." "I wasn't confused." Her face twisted. "You don't understand how serious this is." "I understand perfectly." She let out a sharp breath. "If you don't help us, they'll ruin our lives." "You tried to ruin mine," I said. She flinched, but not because of guilt. Shame and guilt are different things. Shame comes from being exposed. Guilt comes from caring. Only one of those lived in her. She tried again. "Mom, listen. If you retract your statement, say you panicked. I didn't panic. You can fix this," she snapped. "Just fix it." "I'm not responsible for fixing what you broke," I said. She stared at me, chest rising and falling too quickly. Mark cleared his throat, taking a step forward. "Mrs. Hale," he said, "maybe we can talk reasonably." I looked at him once, just once. That was enough to make him shut his mouth and take a step backward. Diana grabbed the doorframe, leaning in. "Mom, please, I'm begging you. They're talking about fraud, about arson. Do you know what that means?" "Yes." "And you're okay with that?" Her voice cracked, high and sharp. "You're okay with letting them destroy your own daughter?" I held her gaze. "You chose your actions, not me." "No," she nearly shouted. "No, you don't get to do this. You don't get to suddenly act like I matter?" I asked quietly. That stopped her. For the first time, her breath stilled. Her mouth tightened. Her eyes darted, looking for something. An excuse? A weapon? A softer version of me she could push around. But I wasn't offering any version except the truth. "You were supposed to trust me," she whispered, voice dropping into something small but venomous. "You were supposed to help us." "Help you do what?" I asked. "Collect what you thought you deserved?" She looked away. The silence between us felt like ice settling over warm water. Finally, she said, "You're punishing me. Is that it? You want me to suffer?" "No," I said. "I want you to stop expecting my silence to protect you." She blinked, stunned. I moved to close the door. "Mom, don't do this," she said, reaching out, her fingers grazing the edge of the door. "Don't shut me out." But it was the first thing I had to do. "I didn't shut you out," I said. "You walked away years ago." And then I closed the door. Not fast, not loud, just firmly. Her muffled voice rose for a moment, anger, then pleading, then curses spoken too quickly to separate. Mark murmured something. A car started, and then silence. Inside the small rental house, the heater clicked on. The windows glowed faintly with winter light. I stood there for a long time, hand resting on the door, the quiet settling over me like a blanket. A heavy truth finally took its place in my chest. You can love someone your whole life and still know when it's time to let them stand outside. The days that followed moved quietly, the way winter mornings move. Slow, muted, but with a purpose that doesn't need announcing. I spent most of the time at the rental house, drinking tea, answering calls from the detective, from Andrew, from the fire investigator. Each conversation added another thread to the net forming around the truth. Not a trap, just a shape that finally fit what had been happening for years. On the third morning, Andrew called. "Margaret," he said, "the DA's office is filing formal charges." I sat down at the kitchen table, smoothing the corner of a placemat someone else had chosen before me. "What kind of charges?" "Attempted arson, attempted insurance fraud, unlawful confinement, negligent endangerment of a dependent adult." He paused. "They're not taking this lightly." I didn't speak for a moment. Not because I was shocked. Shock had left me the night I climbed out the window, but because hearing the words said out loud, in a calm, legal voice, gave them a weight I hadn't anticipated. "Will I have to testify?" I asked. "Eventually," he said gently, "but not now. Right now, all you need to do is stay somewhere safe and let the process move forward." The process. People trust the process because it has steps, order, a beginning, and an end. I trusted it because I had already seen what trusting family without boundaries could cost. "Andrew," I said quietly, "I want to update my will." "I assumed you might," he replied. He came to the rental house that afternoon with a briefcase full of forms. We sat at the small kitchen table, the heater humming behind us. He explained everything in steady, simple terms: who receives what, how property is divided, how medical decisions are made if I can't speak for myself. When he finally slid the papers toward me, I didn't hesitate. My hand trembled a little, but it didn't stop. I crossed out Diana's name. I wrote another. Emily. Not because of pity. Not because she chose me over her parents. But because she still understood what it meant to care without expecting reward. After I signed the last page, Andrew gathered the documents neatly. "Do you feel all right?" he asked. "I feel," I said slowly, "like I've put something back in its rightful place." That evening, Emily came by with groceries, soup, bread, a small bundle of flowers she pretended she just happened to pick up on sale. She didn't ask about the charges. She already knew enough. Instead, she made tea and sat beside me on the couch, as if she'd always belonged there. "Dad's furious," she said quietly. "He says you're ruining the family." I sipped my tea. A family that falls apart when truth enters the room wasn't whole to begin with. She looked down at her hands, twisting the sleeves of her sweater. "I'm not choosing sides," she whispered. "I'm choosing safety." "I know," I said. "I'm glad you are." We sat together, until dusk painted the window a dull blue. When she finally stood to leave, she hugged me longer than usual. "Grandma," she said softly, "you deserve better than how they've treated you." It was a simple sentence, but it settled over me like warm cloth. Not dramatic, not loud, just honest. After she left, I locked the door and stood for a long time in the quiet house. The walls were thin, and I could hear the wind brushing against them. But the space felt mine. Not borrowed, not controlled, not threatened. And as I turned off the lights and walked to the bedroom, one truth glowed steady inside me. Losing my daughter hurt. But losing myself would have cost far more. The house looked worse in daylight than I'd remembered. Smoke stains crept up the siding like dark fingers, and the windows were still boarded in places, but there it stood, upright, stubborn, waiting for what came next. The restoration crew Andrew recommended arrived early, 2 men in heavy jackets and a woman with a clipboard. They moved with quiet confidence, not pity. I appreciated that. Pity has a way of making a person feel smaller than the damage. "Mrs. Hale," the woman said, "we'll start with the structural assessment. You can stay inside if you'd like, but it's cold and loud." "I'll sit in the yard," I said. "I want to see my house." She nodded, respectful. I found the old lawn chair behind the shed. Its paint was chipped, and one leg wobbled until I wedged a flat stone under it. I sat with a blanket around my knees, watching the workers carry out charred wood and bring in new beams as if they were stitching something wounded back together. Every hammer strike felt like an answer to a question I hadn't dared to ask. Can something so damaged still stand? Yes, it can. It just looks different when it does. Around noon, Emily arrived with a thermos of tea and a bag of pastries. She sat beside me, her breath puffing in small, white clouds. She didn't talk much. She didn't need to. Sometimes presence speaks more loudly than any reassurance. When the crew broke for lunch, one of the men approached us. He was young, maybe mid-30s, with a gentle slowness to his movements. "Ma'am," he said, "your foundation's solid. The fire didn't reach it." I nodded, grateful. He hesitated, scratching the back of his neck. "Not all houses do as well. You must have taken good care of it." "I tried," I said, "even when others didn't." He seemed to understand more than I meant to reveal. He tipped his hat and walked off. Emily poured me tea. "Grandma," she said softly, "does being here hurt?" "It should," I said. "But it doesn't. Not the way I expected." The air carried the faint scent of wet ash mixed with the cool river breeze. It wasn't pleasant, but it wasn't unbearable. Just truth in the wind. I watched the workers remove the last pieces of the burned bedroom door. They handled the wood gently, almost respectfully, as if aware of what had happened behind it. I felt no urge to cry. Something in me had already finished grieving the moment I closed the door on Diana at the rental house. "Are you scared to come back home?" Emily asked. "No," I said. "I was scared when I lived here without locks on my life. Not on the doors. On myself." She rested her head lightly against my shoulder. "You're stronger than any of them realize." I shook my head slightly. "I'm not strong. I'm just awake now." For years, I'd walked through this house quietly, shrinking myself to fit the spaces others allowed me. But now, watching beams lifted, walls scraped clean, floors measured, I felt something almost unfamiliar. Choice. A man from the crew asked if I had any paint preferences for the bedroom. Light colors, darker tones, wallpaper options. I surprised myself by answering without hesitation. "No wallpaper," I said. "Fresh paint. Something pale but not cold." He nodded, jotting it down. Emily smiled. "A new start," she said. "Yes," I replied, "but not to erase anything." The afternoon sunlight stretched long across the yard. Dust drifted in the air like soft snowfall. My hands rested on the blanket, steady now, the tremor gone. I knew the house wouldn't be finished for weeks. I knew the legal process would take longer. I knew Diana would try again. Calls, messages, apologies shaped into demands. But none of that pressed on my chest the way it once did. Because sitting there, watching the first boards of my new bedroom wall go up, I understood something simple, quiet, and firm. I wasn't rebuilding a room. I was rebuilding myself. The day they told me the last repairs were finished, I didn't rush. I waited until late afternoon, when the sun softened the edges of everything and shadows stretched long and slow across the yard. I walked up the porch steps, new wood firm under my feet, and turned the key in the lock. The door swung open without effort. No nails, no resistance, just a quiet, welcoming click. The air inside smelled faintly of fresh paint and new lumber. The walls were lighter than before, a soft cream that made the rooms feel larger. The workers had scrubbed away the smoke stains, replaced the floors, rewired the hall. Everything was different, yet recognizable, like a face aged gently rather than damaged. I walked slowly down the hallway, my hand grazing the smooth wall. My steps didn't echo. The house felt warm again, inhabited again, even though I was the only one inside. When I reached the bedroom, I paused. The door was new, simple, unadorned, solid. Exact same shape as before, but with no history in its grain. I turned the knob and stepped in. The room was quiet, peaceful, almost shy, waiting for my approval. The window I'd climbed out of had been replaced. The glass was clean and clear. Through it, I could see the river in the distance, glinting under the late sun. A small breeze carried the scent of winter grass. I walked to the bed, my old frame polished, the linens freshly washed, and sat down. For the first time since that night, I let my shoulders drop, let my breath settle, let the weight I'd been carrying finally leave my spine. I thought of Diana, of the door, of the smoke creeping across the floor, of the moment I saw her on the lawn, phone raised like a witness to a story she wanted to sell. I thought of Emily's steady hands, her quiet loyalty, the way she didn't ask for anything, only offered what she could. And I thought of John, how he used to say that dignity wasn't something people gave you. It was something you protected. I smoothed the blanket across my lap. My hands were older now, thinner, the veins more pronounced, but they still worked. They had pulled me through a window. They had signed my name on a new will. They had closed a door in a rental house with more conviction than I'd known I possessed. Outside, a car passed slowly, then faded away. Quiet returned. For a long while, I simply sat there, letting the late light settle over the room. Nothing dramatic. No grand revelation. Just a simple truth filling the air as naturally as breath. I survived my own daughter's absence long before I survived her betrayal. And now, finally, I wasn't trying to earn my place in anyone's life. The house creaked softly, the gentle, familiar kind of sound like old wood stretching its limbs. It felt like acknowledgement. I stood, walked back to the living room, and opened the windows one by one. Cold air rushed in, fresh and honest. I let it sweep through the house, clearing the last remnants of smoke, of memory, of fear. When I closed the final window, The home felt entirely my own again, not because it was rebuilt, because I was. And if my story means anything to someone who's been holding their breath far too long, someone who's been quiet or overlooked or told they shouldn't take up space, then let it be this. You're allowed to reclaim yourself. And if my voice felt steady to you, or if my journey gave you a bit of courage, then stay close. Follow along, speak up. Leave your mark. Sometimes all it takes to start again is one door you refuse to let others close.